Do you ever wonder what life was really like in the Middle Ages beyond the knights and castles? What if the people shaping society, the very pillars of faith, were entangled in passionate forbidden romances? From the 10th to the 15th centuries, the lives of clergy and laity sometimes intertwined in ways the Church strictly forbade, yet could not always prevent. These were not just whispered rumors. They were often explosive scandals that echoed through history. Number 1. Heloise and Peter Abelard. Their story unfurled in the bustling intellectual heart of 12th century Paris, a city teeming with scholars and ambitious minds. Peter Abelard, a man of immense intellect, was at the very pinnacle of academic renown. He was a philosopher, a theologian, a logician, and a master debater, whose sharp wit and compelling arguments drew students from across Europe. His lectures were legendary, his mind a formidable force that challenged established thought and ignited fierce debate. He was maidoc, confident, and possessed a captivating presence that, according to his own writings, drew women to him like moths to a flame. Though he claimed he mostly ignored them, he found himself drawn into the household of Canon Fulbert, a respected cleric of Notre Dame Cathedral. Fulbert had a niece, Heloise, who was already widely celebrated for her exceptional intelligence and beauty. Heloise was no ordinary young woman. She possessed a remarkable aptitude for languages, philosophy, and classical literature, far surpassing many of her male contemporaries. She was articulate, curious, and her mind was as sharp as Abelard's, eager to grapple with complex ideas. Her reputation for learning had spread beyond Paris, drawing admiration and curiosity. Fulbert, immensely proud of his niece's academic gifts, sought out the finest tutor for her, and who better than Peter Abelard himself? The arrangement seemed ideal. Abelard was invited to live in Fulbert's house, ostensibly to dedicate himself fully to Heloise's education. The lessons began not in a dry academic fashion, but with an intense, almost magnetic exchange of ideas. They spoke of philosophy, of theology, of logic. But as their minds connected, so too did their hearts. Abelard, in his Historia Calamitatum, or The Story of My Misfortunes, recounted how they started with academic studies, but soon, under the pretext of study, we devoted ourselves afforded us the secret solitude that our passion craved. He wrote that their books were open, but more words of love were exchanged than philosophical arguments. Their eyes met across the scrolls, and a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, ignited by an undeniable attraction. Their affair blossomed in secret within the walls of Fulbert's home. The thrill of their hidden passion was intoxicating. Abelard, a cleric, was bound by the celibacy required of his station, though at the time clerical celibacy was not as universally enforced or understood as it would later become, especially for secular clerics like Abelard. Yet an affair was still a transgression, and a sexual relationship between a tutor and his student, especially when living in the student's guardian's house, was profoundly scandalous. Heloise, deeply in love, gave herself fully to the relationship. She was not coerced. Her letters show a powerful, unwavering devotion to Abelard, even arguing that their love was a higher bond than any marriage oath. As their passion intensified, the inevitable consequence arose. Heloise became pregnant. This was a catastrophic blow to Abelard's burgeoning career, and a devastating blow to Fulbert's honor. The secret could no longer be kept. To protect Heloise from public shame and to salvage some semblance of his reputation, Abelard took her away from Paris, sending her to his family in Brittany. There, a son was born, whom they named Astrolabe. Abelard then returned to Paris to confront Fulbert, seeking forgiveness and attempting to mend the broken trust. He proposed a secret marriage, hoping to placate Fulbert and legitimize their child without publicly destroying his clerical career, which a public marriage would have done. Heloise, however, resisted the idea of marriage. Her love for Abelard was so profound that she feared marriage would hinder his academic and spiritual She argued that a scholar of his caliber should not be burdened by the domesticities of a wife and children. She believed he was destined for greatness, and that a marital bond would tie him down, preventing him from reaching his full potential in philosophy and theology. She would rather be his mistress, she said, than his wife, if it meant he could remain fully dedicated to his scholarly pursuits. She valued his intellectual freedom above societal norms and personal comfort. Despite Heloise's objections, Abelard, determined to appease Fulbert and preserve their fragile dignity, insisted on the marriage. They were secretly wed in a private ceremony. This covert union, however, did little to soothe Fulbert's rage and humiliation. He felt deeply dishonored, seeing the marriage as a further attempt to conceal the scandal rather than truly rectify it. He believed Abelard had seduced his niece, brought shame upon their family, and then married her in secret, only to evade public censure. Fulbert's anger festered, turning into a vengeful fury that ultimately led to a horrific act. In a fit of desperate retribution, he orchestrated a brutal assault on Abelard. While Abelard slept, men hired by Fulbert broke into his chambers and castrated him. This barbaric act was intended to destroy Abelard's ability to engage in future illicit affairs and, perhaps more significantly, to humiliate him utterly, striking at the very core of his masculinity and status. The castration ended Abelard's public career as a secular cleric and a renowned teacher in Paris. He was utterly disgraced and shattered by the physical and emotional trauma. He sought refuge in the monastic life, becoming a monk at the Abbey of Saint-Denis. Heloise, heartbroken but resilient, followed a similar path, taking the veil as a nun at the convent of Argenteuil for a life of contemplation, though now under the shadow of immense personal tragedy. For many years they lived separate lives, bound by the trauma of their past, but physically apart. Abelard found no peace in his monastic life, continuing to stir controversy with his theological views. Heloise, too, rose in stature, becoming the abbess of the Paraclete, a convent Abelard had initially founded. It was years later that their famous correspondence began, a collection of letters that offer a profound, poignant, and often heartbreaking glimpse into their minds and hearts. These letters reveal the enduring depth of their love, their intellectual connection, and their spiritual struggles. Heloise, in her letters, expressed her unwavering love for Abelard, her lingering pain, and her conflicted feelings about their past. She spoke of how she could not separate her love for him from her devotion to God, how his name and his image still haunted her thoughts. She bravely articulated the raw emotion of her love, unashamed even as she embraced her religious vows. Abelard, in his responses, often took a more spiritual and penitent tone, urging her towards a life of faith and detachment from earthly desires. Yet his letters too betrayed a deep, if often suppressed, affection and respect for Heloise's intellect and spirit. Their exchange touched on philosophy, theology, and the very nature of love, suffering, and divine grace. The story of Heloise and Peter Abelard is not just a tale of forbidden love. It is a profound exploration of human passion, intellectual brilliance, devastating consequences, and enduring spiritual connection. Their affair challenged the very foundations of clerical celibacy and societal norms, leaving an indelible mark on the history of thought and emotion in the Middle Ages. Their letters stand as a testament to a love that defied convention, survived immense suffering, and continues to captivate hearts centuries later. Number 2. Pope Sergius III and Marozia. Journey back to 10th century Rome, a period often referred to by historians as the Saeculum Obscurum, or Dark Age. For the papacy, this was a time of immense political instability, where the papacy was not a beacon of spiritual authority, but a prize fought over by powerful Roman aristocratic families. One such family, the Theophylacti, wielded immense influence, their power cemented by wealth, military might, and cunning political maneuvering. Among them, a woman named Marozia emerged as a central, formidable figure. She was the daughter of Theophylact, a powerful Roman count, and his equally influential wife, Theodora the Elder. Marozia was born into a world of power and intrigue. Trained from a young age in the ruthless art of Roman politics, Marozia was described by contemporary chroniclers, albeit often hostile ones, as beautiful, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. She was a woman who understood how to leverage her charm and her family's formidable power to achieve her aims. Her influence over Roman affairs, and specifically over the papacy, was so profound that this era was later scornfully dubbed the pornocracy, or rule of the harlots, by Protestant critics, though this term might be an oversimplification. Marozia's impact was undeniable. Into this tumultuous scene stepped Sergius. Before becoming pope, he was cardinal priest of San Martino, ai Monti. He had previously been deeply embroiled in papal politics, having supported Pope Formosus, then later opposing his successor, Pope Stephen VI, who famously put Formosus's corpse on trial in the Cadaver Synod. Sergius himself had been exiled for his involvement in these bitter disputes, enduring years of political wilderness. He was a man who knew the harsh realities of Roman power struggles and who clearly harbored immense ambition. When Pope Leo V and his successor Antipope Christopher were deposed in rapid succession in 904, it was the influential Theophylacti family, led by Theodora and her ambitious daughter, Marozia, who seized the opportunity to install their own candidate. Sergius, a seasoned survivor of the Roman power games, was the man they chose. He was elected pope, becoming Sergius III. He returned to Rome with a clear understanding of who had placed him on the papal throne. The relationship between Sergius III and Marozia quickly became more than just a political alliance. While the exact nature and emotional depth of their love affair are debated by modern historians, contemporary accounts strongly suggest a passionate and illicit sexual relationship. The Liber Pontificalis, a collection of papal biographies, and the writings of Liutprand of Cremona, a bishop and chronicler, though often a partisan and gossipy one, openly accused Sergius III of having Marozia as his mistress. Liutprand in particular writes with thinly veiled disdain about the moral decay of the Roman See during this period. Directly implicating Marozia in the scandals from their illicit union, a son was born. This child, named John, would later achieve the unthinkable. He himself would become pope, Pope John XI. The birth of a son to a reigning pope and a powerful Roman noblewoman was an extraordinary scandal, even in an era accustomed to papal irregularities. This was not a private indiscretion. It was a public reality, one that cemented Marozia's already immense influence over the Holy See. Her son, born of the Pope, was now part of a lineage that would control the papacy for decades. Marozia used her relationship with Sergius III and the subsequent birth of their son to solidify her family's grip on Rome. She became the virtual ruler of the city, controlling who was appointed to positions of power, including the papacy itself. She was known as the Senatrix of Rome and the Patrician of Rome, titles that spoke of her secular authority. Papal Palace. The Lateran became her personal residence, where she conducted her political machinations and maintained her formidable influence. Her influence continued long after Sergius III's death in 911. Marozia went on to marry powerful Roman nobles, first Alberic, the first of Spoleto, then Guy of Tuscany, and finally, in a highly controversial move, Hugh of Arles, the King of Italy, who was also her half-brother. Each marriage was a strategic move to consolidate her power and that of her family. Through these alliances, and through the men she helped install as popes, Marozia maintained her unparalleled control over Rome and the Church. The affair between Sergius III and Marozia was not just a personal transgression. It was a symbol of the profound secularization and corruption of the papacy. In the 10th century, It highlighted how the spiritual office had become entangled with temporal power, how personal ambition and dynastic control could override canonical law and spiritual ideals. The scandalous birth of their son John XI, who became Pope in 931, further underscored this reality, demonstrating how a powerful woman could literally place her own offspring born of an illicit union. Ultimately, Marozia's reign of power came to an end in 932, when her own son, Alberic II of Spoleto, not Pope John XI, but another son from her first marriage, led an uprising against her and her new husband, King Hugh of Arles. She was imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo, the very fortress that had once symbolized her family's control over Rome, and vanished from the historical record, her ultimate fate unknown. The story of Sergius III and Marozia is a stark reminder of a dark chapter in papal history, where the lines between sacred and profane, spiritual and political, blurred almost beyond recognition, all under the shadow of a powerful and scandalous affair. Number 3. Pope John XII. In the heart of 10th century Rome, a period often remembered for its political chaos and moral decay within the Church, emerged a figure who would become infamous for his debauchery and scandalous life. His name was Octavian, and he was the son of Alberic II of Spoleto, the very man who had imprisoned his own mother, Marozia, and effectively ruled Rome as Prince and Senator of all Romans. Octavian, born into this powerful and corrupt Roman aristocracy, inherited his father's secular power at an astonishingly young age. When his father died in 954, Octavian was still a teenager, possibly only 18 years old. On his deathbed, Alberic II made the Roman nobility swear an oath that upon the death of Pope Agapetus II, his son Octavian would be elected pope. This was a naked assertion of dynastic power, an attempt to combine the secular control of Rome with the spiritual authority of the papacy under one family. True to the oath, upon Agapetus II's death, in 955, Octavian was indeed elected pope. He was still very young, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, and entirely unprepared for the spiritual responsibilities of the office. Upon his election, Octavian took the name John XII, becoming the first pope to adopt a new regnal name upon ascending the papal throne. This was meant to signify a break from his secular identity, but his actions quickly proved that the transformation was superficial at best. John XII was a product of the Saeculum Obscurum, and he swiftly became its most notorious symbol. His pontificate, lasting from 955 to 964, was a period of shocking scandal, marked by extreme personal misconduct that earned him the moniker, the vilest of popes, from contemporary critics. John XII's reign was characterized by a blatant disregard for the sacred duties of his office and an uninhibited pursuit of worldly pleasures. The Lateran Palace, the traditional residence of the popes, was reportedly transformed into a veritable brothel, a hub of drunken revelry, gambling, and illicit sexual encounters. Contemporary chroniclers, particularly Liutprand of Cremona, who served the Emperor Otto I and was keen to discredit the Roman papacy, painted a vivid, if perhaps exaggerated, picture of John XII's depravity. Liutprand, in his Antipodosis and De Rebus Gestis Autonis Magni Imperatoris, provided a litany of accusations against John XII. He detailed numerous affairs with laywomen, citing specific names in situations that shocked even the hardened sensibilities of 10th century Rome. Among the most infamous alleged mistresses was a woman named Stephanie, described as a concubine, who lived openly with the Pope. Other named women included Benedicta, a widow who was allegedly one of his many paramours, and an anonymous widow of his steward. These were not discreet secret liaisons. They were, according to accounts, part of a public pattern of behavior that scandalized many, even those accustomed to the lax morals of the time. The accusations against John XII went far beyond simple affairs. He was accused of committing sacrilege, including celebrating Mass without taking communion and performing ordinations in stables. He was said to have gambled with pilgrims' offerings, and his excesses often spiraled into violence. He was alleged to have mutilated and blinded cardinals, murdered political rivals, and turned the papal palace into a den of iniquity, where women were regularly assaulted. Liutprand claimed that every honest woman was afraid to go on pilgrimage to Rome for fear of being ravished by him. The scale of his immorality became so egregious that it prompted the intervention of Emperor Otto I, who had been crowned Holy Roman Emperor by John XII himself. Otto, initially a protector of the Pope, grew increasingly dismayed by John XII's erratic behavior and his willingness to make shifting alliances with political enemies. In 963, Emperor Otto convened a synod in Rome, a council of bishops, to address the Pope's conduct. At this synod, a long list of charges was formally brought against John XII. These charges included not only sacrilege and violence, but also specific allegations of sexual misconduct with multiple laywomen. The accusations were detailed and numerous, ranging from incest to adultery to general promiscuity. Witnesses were called who testified to his affairs and his scandalous lifestyle. The synod, horrified by the evidence, declared John XII unfit for the papacy. John XII, however, refused to acknowledge the synod's authority. He fled Rome, retaliating by excommunicating those who had participated in the synod. He attempted to raise an army to regain control of the city, plunging Rome into further chaos. Otto I then had Leo VIII elected as Pope in John XII's place, creating a schism. The end of John XII's notorious life was as sordid as his pontificate. He died in 964, still a young man, possibly in his late 20s. The exact circumstances of his death are debated, but most accounts link it directly to his illicit lifestyle. One widely repeated story, recorded by Liutprand of Cremona, claims that John XII died having been caught by a devil struck on the temple after he had been in bed with a woman. This dramatic account, though perhaps embellished, powerfully illustrates the prevailing view that his scandalous affairs and immoral conduct had led directly to his demise. A divine judgment for his egregious sins, John XII's life and pontificate stand as a chilling example of the depths to which the papacy could sink when temporal power overshadowed spiritual purpose. His numerous affairs with laywomen were not just personal indiscretions, but became emblematic of an era where the highest office in Christendom was consumed by worldly appetites and political machinations, leaving a lasting scar on the reputation of the medieval Church. Number 4. Pope Alexander VI and Vanozza de Catanei. Fast forward to the late 15th century, the vibrant, often chaotic, and endlessly ambitious era of the Renaissance. Papal court in Rome was no longer merely a spiritual center. It was a powerful secular state, a hub of political intrigue, artistic patronage, and immense wealth. And at its heart stood a figure who would become synonymous with both immense power and scandalous personal life. Rodrigo Borgia, who would become Pope Alexander VI. Born in Uxtava, Spain in 1431, Rodrigo Borgia was a man of extraordinary ambition, charm, and intelligence. He was the nephew of Pope Calixtus III, who swiftly elevated him to cardinal deacon. At the remarkably young age of 25, from that point, Rodrigo's ascent was rapid and relentless. He accumulated vast wealth, influence, and numerous benefices. He was a master of diplomacy and administration, known for his persuasive abilities and his understanding of power dynamics. Despite his cardinalate, and later his papacy, Rodrigo Borgia harbored no pretense of strict celibacy. For years, he maintained long-term intimate relationships with several laywomen, or at least notoriously, fathering children even while serving as a prominent prince of the church. The most significant and enduring of these relationships was with Venosa de Catani. Venosa, born Giovanna de Candia, came from a respectable but not aristocratic Roman family. She was several decades younger than Rodrigo. Their relationship began in the 1470s, when Rodrigo was already a powerful cardinal. This was not a fleeting affair, but a deep, long-lasting connection that endured for many years even after Rodrigo became pope. Venosa was not a courtesan in the typical sense. She was a clever, practical, and business-minded woman who managed taverns and inns in Rome, accumulating her own wealth and status. From their union, Rodrigo and Venosa had 4 children who were openly acknowledged and cherished by their father: Cesare Borgia, born around 1475, Juan Borgia, born around 1476, Lucrezia Borgia, born around 1481. These children were not kept hidden. They were raised within Rome's elite society, their parentage an open secret, if not always explicitly stated, within the highest circles. Rodrigo provided handsomely for Venosa and their children, ensuring their comfort, education, and social standing. He arranged advantageous marriages for his children and carved out powerful positions for them, especially for Cesare and Lucrezia, who would become major figures in Renaissance politics. In 1492, after years of intense lobbying, political maneuvering, and likely significant bribery, Rodrigo Borgia was elected pope, taking the name Alexander VI. His election did not end his relationships or his focus on his children. If anything, his papacy marked an unprecedented period of papal nepotism and familial advancement. Venosa, while no longer living openly with him in the Vatican, continued to be his trusted confidant and the mother of his beloved children. She lived a comfortable life in Rome, revered as the mother of the Borgia children, and continued to manage her businesses, while Venosa was his primary, long-term partner and the mother of his most famous children. Alexander VI also had other relationships during his pontificate. The most notable of these was with Giulia Farnese, a young, exceptionally beautiful noblewoman married to Orsini. Their affair began around 1493, shortly after his election, and was well known in Rome. Giulia was known as La Bella, or the Beautiful One, and her beauty captivated the aging pope. Her brother, Alessandro Farnese, would later become Pope Paul III, a rise undoubtedly aided by Giulia's connection to Alexander VI. This affair, though less enduring than his relationship with Venosa, highlighted the Pope's continued disregard for the vow of celibacy and his pursuit of personal pleasure, even on the very throne of St. Peter. The affairs of Alexander VI were not hidden or merely whispered about. They were a prominent part of his pontificate, drawing both fascination and condemnation from contemporary observers. His critics, often driven by political or religious opposition, used his personal life as powerful ammunition to denounce the moral corruption of the papacy. Yet within Rome, among the powerful families in the court, his family was often simply accepted as a fact of life, albeit a scandalous one. Alexander VI famously sought to elevate his children to positions of immense power and wealth. Cesare, initially destined for the church, famously abandoned his cardinalate to pursue a military and political career, becoming a formidable, ruthless duke. Lucrezia was married multiple times to powerful figures, each marriage a strategic alliance for the Borgia family. Geoffrey, the youngest, also benefited from dynastic arrangements. The legacy of Alexander VI's affairs is complex. On one hand, they exemplify the deep moral decay and secularization of the Renaissance papacy, where personal ambition and familial interests often overshadowed spiritual leadership. On the other hand, they reveal a man who, despite his sacred office, was deeply human. His relationship with Venosa in particular was enduring and productive, creating one of the most famous and infamous families in European history. Alexander VI died in 1503, leaving behind a papacy forever marked by his ambition, his political prowess, and his unapologetic embrace of a worldly life, epitomized by his scandalous but deeply added relationships with laywomen like Vannozza, de Catane, and Giulia Farnese. Their story is a captivating glimpse into the opulent, dangerous, and morally ambiguous world of the Renaissance Church. Number 5. Pope Benedict IX. In the chaotic annals of 11th century Rome, a period following the pornocracy but still rife with aristocratic infighting and papal instability, a figure emerged who would become one of the most notorious and scandalous popes in history, Theophylact of Tusculum, better known as Pope Benedict IX. His story is not just one of an illicit affair, but of a life so steeped in vice and corruption that it challenged the very notion of papal sanctity. Benedict IX was born into the powerful and ambitious Tusculani family, who were the reigning political force in Rome at the time. His family had a history of installing popes. Both his father, Alberic III, and his grandfather, Gregory I, were powerful counts who effectively controlled the papacy. His uncle John XIX and his granduncle Benedict VIII had also been popes. This dynastic control meant that Theophylact, like John XII before him, was not chosen for his piety or theological acumen, but for his family's political might. He was elevated to the papacy in 1032, reportedly, through bribery and immense family influence, and he was shockingly young at the time, possibly as young as 12, though most historians estimate him to be closer to 20 years old. Regardless, he was utterly unprepared for the spiritual responsibilities of the Holy See. His pontificate, which lasted intermittently for 3 separate terms between 1032 and 1048, was an unprecedented era of personal degradation. Benedict IX, inheriting the secular power and debauched tendencies of some of his predecessors, plunged headlong into a life of wanton excess. Contemporary chroniclers, many of whom are horrified by his conduct, painted a picture of a pope who behaved more like a depraved Roman emperor than the vicar of Christ. He was accused of a litany of sins far beyond a mere sexual misconduct. He was alleged to have committed many vile adulteries and unchaste impurities, to have engaged in orgies, murder, and even acts of violence and pillage within the city of Rome. Among the specific accusations leveled against him by figures like the German Pope Leo IX and Peter Damian, a prominent reformer and cardinal, were numerous illicit relationships with laywomen, while specific names of his lovers are less consistently recorded than those of popes, like Alexander VI. The accounts emphasize the sheer scale and openness of his promiscuity. Peter Damian, in his Liber Gomorianus, a treatise condemning clerical sexual immorality, referred to Benedict IX as demon from hell in the disguise of a priest, describing his life as a banquet of immorality and accusing him of various sexual transgressions, including sodomy and rape. Though Damian's account is a polemic, its very existence and the widespread nature of the accusations speak to the notoriety of Benedict's personal life. His affairs were not about love or even deep connection, but rather about unbridled lust and the abuse of power. As Pope, he wielded immense authority, which he used to indulge his every carnal desire. He was said to frequent taverns and brothels, behaving with a shocking disregard for his sacred office. His personal conduct was a source of profound scandal, not just in Rome but across Europe, contributing significantly to the growing calls for church reform and the enforcement of clerical celibacy. The outrage over Benedict IX's conduct eventually became so great that it led to extraordinary measures. In 1044, a popular uprising in Rome drove him out, and Sylvester III was elected pope in his place. However, Benedict IX, with the support of his Tusculani family, soon returned with an army and expelled Sylvester, reclaiming the papacy in 1045. But Benedict IX weary of the constant political turmoil and perhaps desiring a more stable life, then made an astonishing decision. In a move unprecedented in papal history, he sold the papacy to his godfather John Gratian, who became Pope Gregory VI. The reason for this sale, according to some accounts, was that Benedict IX wanted to marry a laywoman, his cousin, and needed funds to support his new life and shed the constraints of the papacy. This alleged desire to marry a laywoman, though a common narrative further, decrees the powerful influence of his personal illicit relationships on his tenure as pope. He apparently found the demands of the papal throne too burdensome, desiring the freedom to live openly with a woman. The sale of the papacy, an act of shocking simony, plunged the Church into further crisis, leading to 3 rival popes, Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and Gregory VI. This scandal provoked the intervention of Emperor Henry III, who convened the Council of Sutri in 1046, deposing all 3 claimants and installing a new reforming pope. Even after his deposition, Benedict IX, stubborn and resilient, attempted to reclaim the papacy, once more illustrating his unwavering ambition and disregard for ecclesiastical law. He finally faded from the historical record around 1048, his ultimate fate uncertain, though some accounts suggest he eventually became a monk and lived a penitent life, a stark contrast to his earlier notorious reign. The affairs of Pope Benedict IX, though lacking specific, named partners and detailed romantic narratives, were a central feature of his infamy. They were part of a pattern of widespread moral corruption that made his pontificate a byword for depravity, demonstrating how personal indulgence in illicit relationships could utterly debase the highest office in Christendom, forcing a desperate emperor to intervene and laying the groundwork for radical church reform. Number 6. Archbishop Adalbert of Hamburg, Bremen. Shift our gaze to 11th century Northern Europe, a world of powerful archbishops who were not only spiritual leaders, but also significant secular rulers, wielding immense temporal power over vast territories. One such figure was Adalbert, Archbishop of Hamburg, Bremen, whose life and career were marked by relentless ambition, vast wealth, and a personal conduct that drew widespread condemnation. Adalbert was born around 1000 into a noble Saxon family. He received a good education and quickly rose through the ecclesiastical ranks due to his sharp intellect, charisma, and formidable political skills. He became Archbishop of Hamburg, Bremen in 1043, a powerful see with missionary jurisdiction over Scandinavia and the Slavic lands to the east. Adalbert envisioned himself as a patriarch of the north, seeking to establish an independent patriarchate for the northern lands, free from the direct authority of Rome or the Holy Roman Emperor. Adalbert was a man of immense vanity and an insatiable appetite for power and wealth. He built lavish palaces, dressed in magnificent robes, and maintained a princely court that rivaled those of secular rulers. He was a skilled diplomat, a cunning politician, and a Maidoc leader who initially gained favor with Emperor Henry III. However, his ambition quickly turned into arrogance, and his pursuit of wealth and influence led him to engage in widespread corruption. Contemporary chroniclers, particularly Adam of Bremen, who wrote the Gesta Hamburgensis, Ecclesiae Pontificum, Deeds of the Bishops of the Hamburg Church, in the late 11th century, provide extensive, though often critical, accounts of Adalbert's life. Adam, while initially an admirer, became increasingly disillusioned by Adalbert's excesses. He details how Adalbert used his ecclesiastical office for personal gain, selling church lands, accepting bribes for appointments, and plundering church treasuries to fund his extravagant lifestyle and political schemes. Within this context of immense power and pervasive corruption, Adalbert's personal life was also a subject of significant scandal. While Adam of Bremen does not detail specific love affairs with named laywomen in the same romantic vein as Heloise and Abelard, He strongly alludes to a lifestyle of moral laxity that included illicit sexual relationships. Adam often describes Adalbert's court as being filled with parasites and unworthy associates, implicitly suggesting a dissolute atmosphere where clerical celibacy was not observed. Adalbert's lavish lifestyle meant he surrounded himself with worldly comforts and pleasures, including the company of women. As a powerful, wealthy, and unmarried prelate, he would have been under constant temptation, and chroniclers imply he succumbed to these temptations regularly. The accusations against him included pride, avarice, and engaging in filthy living or disgraceful conduct, which in the language of the time often encompassed sexual impropriety. The fact that such a prominent and powerful figure was repeatedly accused of neglecting his spiritual duties in favor of worldly pursuits, including presumed illicit relationships, made his personal conduct a famous scandal across the Holy Roman Empire. His open disregard for the principles of monastic living and clerical celibacy, despite his high office, was a major source of criticism from reforming elements within the Church. His lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the ideals of spiritual purity and detachment. The very opulence of his court, the feasts and the constant entertainments, implied an environment where forbidden liaisons were not only possible, but likely commonplace. Adalbert's rise to power reached its peak during the Regency for the young Emperor Henry IV, when he became one of the most powerful men in the empire, briefly dominating the imperial court. During this period, his corruption reached new heights, and his arrogance became unbearable. He alienated powerful nobles and fellow ecclesiastics through his land grabs, his financial extortion, and his general overbearing nature. His downfall was as spectacular as his rise. In 1066, a conspiracy of Saxon princes and bishops forcibly removed him from the imperial court, stripping him of his influence and most of his possessions. He was left isolated, disgraced, and almost penniless. He returned to his diocese, which had been plundered and ravaged during his absence. Adalbert spent his final years attempting to rebuild his shattered power base, but he never regained his former glory. He died in 1072, leaving behind a legacy of immense ambition, political genius, and profound corruption. While the specifics of his love affairs with laywomen might be less detailed than those of the popes, the chronicled accounts of his notorious lifestyle clearly point to a pattern of illicit relationships that were a significant, powerful, and ultimately tragic career. His life serves as a powerful example of how the temptations of vast secular power could lead even the highest-ranking clerics to disregard their vows and engage in relationships that scandalized the Church. Number 7. Bishop Henry of Winchester and his alleged relationships. In the intricate tapestry of 12th century England, a period defined by civil war, shifting loyalties, and powerful individuals, one figure stood out for his immense influence, wealth, and often controversial personal life. He was the younger brother of King Stephen, and his lineage placed him at the very heart of Anglo-Norman politics. Born around 1098, Henry was sent to the prestigious Cluny Abbey in France for his education, where he absorbed the strict monastic discipline and the grand vision of Cluniac reform. Yet, despite his monastic training, his life as a bishop was profoundly entangled with the secular world, including allegations of illicit relationships with laywomen. Henry's rise in the church was swift and strategic. In 1126, his uncle, King Henry I, appointed him abbot of Glastonbury, one of the wealthiest and most historically significant abbeys in England. Just 3 years later, in 1129, he was made Bishop of Winchester, one of the richest and most influential sees in the country. This dual role made him a formidable figure, combining monastic authority with episcopal power and immense wealth. When King Henry I died in 1135, England was plunged into a period of civil war known as the Anarchy, as his brother Stephen and his cousin Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I, vied for the throne. Bishop Henry of Winchester played a pivotal, often shifting role in this conflict. He was a master of political maneuvering, initially supporting his brother Stephen, then briefly defecting to Matilda. only to return to Stephen's side. He built castles, minted his own coins, and commanded armies, behaving more like a powerful feudal baron than a spiritual leader. Within this tumultuous political landscape, Henry's personal life also drew scrutiny. While historical sources from this period are less explicit about the love affairs of non-papal clerics compared to those of the popes, the accusations against powerful bishops like Henry of Winchester often included licentiousness and disregard for their vows of celibacy. As a highly visible and wealthy prelate who lived in grand style surrounded by a court, his personal conduct would have been under constant observation. Chroniclers like William of Malmesbury and the author of the Gesta Stephani, Deeds of Stephen, extensively detail Henry of Winchester's political ambitions, his wealth, and his love for magnificent buildings and art. But they are more circumspect about his private moral conduct. However, the context of the time, where clerical celibacy was a constant struggle for enforcement and powerful figures often lived outside the strictures they preached, suggests that such men would have maintained relationships with laywomen. While no single famous love affair with a named laywoman is explicitly detailed and universally agreed upon by historians as a central part of Bishop Henry's notoriety, the very atmosphere of his court and his deep involvement in worldly affairs fostered an environment where illicit relations were likely. Accusations of unchastity or dissoluteness were common rhetorical weapons used against powerful clerics, by their enemies or by reformers. Given his known love for luxury and power, it is highly probable that his lifestyle included relationships that defied his ecclesiastical vows. One of the most persistent, though speculative, associations involves Matilda of Boulogne, King Stephen's wife and queen. While she was his sister-in-law, their close political alliance during the anarchy and Henry's frequent presence at her side, coupled with the general moral laxity attributed to powerful clerics of the time, fueled rumors. However, it's crucial to note that this was likely more political speculation and insinuation rather than a widely accepted love affair in the romantic sense. Nonetheless, in an era of political intrigue and personal scandal, such whispers were part of a prominent figure's fame. Henry of Winchester famously built and embellished numerous religious houses, including Wolsey Castle in Winchester, which was more a fortress palace than a bishop's residence. He was a patron of the arts and a collector of antiquities. His very presence, moving between the sacred and the secular, commanding armies and presiding over synods, symbolized the complex and often contradictory nature of the medieval church. His actions, both political and personal, would have been widely discussed and debated. In a time when the Church was striving to enforce stricter celibacy, a powerful figure like Henry of Winchester, who appeared to defy these norms, would inevitably attract notoriety. For his personal life, Henry of Winchester lived to be an old man, dying in 1171, long after the end of the anarchy and the reign of his brother. His life was a testament to the immense power and influence of a medieval bishop and the often blurred lines between spiritual leadership and worldly ambition. While the specifics of his love affairs with laywomen remain shrouded in the general accusations of an era, his prominent position and the nature of the period suggest a personal life that, like many powerful clerics, included relations that were forbidden by the Church, contributing to the famous though controversial medieval figures